Hi, everyone. I'm Sophia Epstein. I'm a freelance writer, journalist, editor, etc., etc. And I also write the Open Tab Substack, which is where I go into the weird, unusual corners of the internet and write about speculative things about the future. Now, my panelists, more importantly, would each of you like to go down the line? Maybe each of you could just quickly introduce yourselves, say what you do in relation to DefenceTech.
Sounds good. Yeah, excited to be here. The name's Tim Chrisman. I lead, there we go. My name's Tim Chrisman. I lead growth for Thor Dynamics, a startup from the US that makes high energy lasers to shoot down drones. In my past life, I was an Army Special Operations Officer, CIA officer. So DefenceTech is what I've been doing since I was 17.
Hi everyone, I'm Hannah Croft, Director of Marketing from Rowden Technologies. We're a British engineering company, medium-sized, one of the fastest growing tech companies in the UK. We specialize in building information sharing systems, sensing, networking, essentially like the critical enabling technologies for frontline operations in defense, intelligence, emergency response. My background, like self-professed defense nerd, was at a defense think tank for a few years and worked in consultancy as well. But yeah, good to be here.
Great. Hello, everyone. So thrilled to be part of this new format of TechBBQ. I'm Eric Balk, the CIO of the Danish Sovereign Wealth Fund, also known as IFO, and we invest, well, substantially now over the past year in defense funds and defense technology, not only in Denmark but also outside. Pleased to be part of this conversation.
Perfect.
Yes, my name is Constantijn van Oranje. I work at TechLeap. We are the Dutch accelerator for tech companies. I'm also a board member of the NATO Innovation Fund, so that's kind of my relationship to this panel, I guess. But we're also looking at how to accelerate companies that are dual use and basically developing this whole new category of actually new sector in the Netherlands.
Great. So we've got two people from startups, two people with a broader perspective on the defense tech industry. Now, what about you guys? Can I have a show of hands of people who work in defense tech or invest in defense tech? Of you? And who wants to work in defense tech?
So who's aspiring? There are two aspiring.
Yeah, there's a few of you out there. Okay, it's good to know. So the panel today was kind of pitched as, is defense tech the new sovereignty play? So first I'd like to ask you all, like, what do you think of that? Do you think that with defense tech we're going to be, thank you, going to be, like more countries are going to be able to be more sovereign in their military efforts, or do you think collaboration and cooperation are still going to be the most important thing?
Yeah, so because I, of course, represent NATO, which is by definition a collaboration, and I don't think that national defense authorities can actually sustain the kind of markets that we are aspiring to trigger. So companies that, even if they now emerge from Denmark or they emerge from the Netherlands or the UK, they will be serving the whole of the NATO alliance and others as well. So definitely collaboration, even though you probably want some local engagement. And so there will be, because many of these ecosystems are very local. And there's, you got your investors, and so there you also have to kind of trigger that entrepreneurship. But on the whole, the customers will always be international, and you'll have to work in an international system where you have to plug into. So definitely collaboration.
Yes, Eric.
Sure. It's an easy question for somebody living in Denmark, because we haven't really been engaged in defense tech for quite a while. So there's no way around teaming up with people who know what they're doing and who have been doing this for a long time. So that's essentially our strategy, to create partnerships both on this side of the pond and on the other side of the pond.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, like, no one country can really lead in technology development across all technology categories. Just like one company can't deliver a single solution optimally anymore. You rely on a set of ecosystem partners, a supply chain to deliver capability. I think ultimately you've sort of got four options. You can buy commercial off the shelf from a foreign supplier, which is usually the quickest, the cheapest way of doing so. You could co-develop, where you may perhaps have the manufacturing domestically, but you still don't own, the source code or some of the key IP. You could collaborate internationally, or you can make some decisions about what capability you want to develop domestically. I think ultimately you're going to have a mix, and then the question becomes, well, what are the decisions that I'm going to make? How do we as a nation evaluate which technologies we want to have domestic control over, and how do we build and sustain a market around that? Which is a very challenging question, and we're seeing now the emergence of industrial strategies across different nations, which I think reflect that intent. Now it's in the execution and where those decisions will probably lie.
Yeah, and I would want to amplify what you said there, that when you're talking about choosing what you can specialize in, there's a lot of pressure from national governments to bring defense tech back in-house. And so they need a political win. And so finding that niche for the country, I think, helps restore that sense of sovereignty. But at the end of the day, I agree with the rest of the panelists that it's inefficient and likely going to produce inferior outcome to try to take all of defense tech under a single country's umbrella.
Right. Also, audience members, my panelists requested a lot of audience questions. They want to hear from you. So if you want to put your questions into the Slido, we'll be asking them throughout. We're not going to wait till the end, so just go for it now whenever you want. Now another one from me. So there's a lot of unpredictability geopolitically, generally, but especially right now. We don't know who's going to need what, when, basically, in terms of defense, or what the future holds. Does that have any impact on the investability of the space, do you think?
Well,
Eric, please begin.
Yeah, maybe as a CEO, it's kind of obvious to answer that question. I think let me say to begin with, we may not know what's to come, but we do know that the demand for defense tech is ever increasing and will be ever increasing for as long as we can predict. Just right now, the number 5% of GDP in every European market amounts to an insane number. So there is the demand side is certainly checked off already. When it then comes to deciding which technologies to back, I think what we are seeing now is an ever-changing landscape also in terms of velocity of technologies. So we try and define it in the sense that we have this old world technology space that used to be defense, and now it is being challenged by a number of new technologies in every single aspect of modern warfare or even sort of the larger security landscape. And that's what we are going to maneuver in. So that will be surely challenging.
Yeah, and I would say from the demand side on the startups, we're hearing from governments around the world, they want modular, they want upgradable, they want open source if it's possible, because they don't want to be locked in to 20 years with a Boeing or a Lockheed. And so that old way of doing defense tech, I think, is no longer investable. Yeah. But when you can be agile, when you can adapt, and when you can show a customer, hey, in 3 years, when everything's changed, you can still upgrade this, that's very appealing.
Yeah. Good point.
And I think again, this comes back to another really challenging balance or a trade-off, which is that you've got a limited budget. You have to be investing in the sustainment of your existing capabilities to be always on, ready to deploy. You've then got to be investing in the modernization of those capabilities, and then you've also got to be investing in longer-term future technologies, markets that you might, quantum, for example. And so making the decisions as to how should we be allocating capital, and also mobilizing the political will against each of those is really challenging. And I guess from my perspective, or from a From the demand side, as you say, it's about being ready to satisfy both of those types of demands at the same time. So different requirements reflect whether this is an upgrade to an existing system or one that we're looking to modernize for the future. But yeah, it's very challenging.
Yeah, I think for the traditional venture capital play, it's not a very easy market, and it's still very unclear how the exits will work, and it's also how do you sustain a growth path if the external factors are so uncertain. So as a founder, you need to really think about what kind of financing you need. For some activities, maybe venture capital is not the best way. I mean, it's probably bootstrapping and working your way through the procurement cycle, doing pilots and those kind of things. And so NATO also provides that through Diana, which is our accelerator. Others can actually get venture capital funding, and a lot of course, new funds being set up. There's a lot of public money. Public money tends to be a bit more on focusing on the impact side, maybe less on the typical financial return, and so maybe that's a better option. That's where we are as well as NATO, but also in the fund we're all continuously balancing out those two interests. You know, we have our sovereign LPs that want, one hand they want a return, and the other hand they want impact, and it's also as an investor it's quite hard to balance those two. But in the end, if you choose venture capital as a model, it has to return capital, and so you're looking for companies that actually will do that and will have thought about that, where that continuous growth path will go. Even you know what it means, that you know either is in dual use, so you have to have that flexibility, you have modularity and other things, or you have a specific market where the growth is so obvious that you're in a niche where it will remain interesting and in the coming years to be vested in.
Great. Yeah. Well, we've got a lot of questions coming in, and the first few are about ethics, and I conveniently have one prepared on that. There's a lot of ethical implications in this space. Obviously, there's on the Ukraine side, we're seeing kind of an underdog nation be able to use this kind of technology for defense, but often in conflicts that's not really the case, and the more stronger power is the one with the tech in hand. How do your founders or founders that you work with kind of balance those ethical implications? And do you think, Constantijn, you mentioned dual use. Do you think dual use is a useful argument in the case about when it comes to the ethical implications of defense tech?
I'll take this one.
Yes.
I guess I have two responses to that. I think the first thing is more like in the discursive realm. I think that by reframing defense as national resilience, as a pillar of sovereignty, what you're able to do is essentially make it more palatable investment. It's also more palatable to civil society. I think that private capital as well as civil society are more accepting of larger amounts of investment into defense given what is going on in Ukraine. But I think that reframing serves a really useful purpose for various reasons. And I think secondly, just on your question of how we respond or founders respond, I mean, I'm no specialist in ethics, but what I would say is I think transparency is really important. So I think when we saw some of the walkouts and protests in Silicon Valley about 10 or so years ago, I think the reason for that was less about the existence of a contract with the military, but more about the secrecy. I think people felt misled. So I think actually the issue isn't in taking a position, it's an obscuring one. And so something at our business is, that we really champion is like transparency, encouraging our staff, our partners to ask about who we deliver, what are the sort of decision-making lenses we apply to where we operate and why. And so I think that's really important.
Yeah. I don't think dual use is an ethical issue. Dual use is a business choice.
I mean that people, like, you know, rather than saying, oh, you're investing in it for this dual use rather than for the military use.
I think no, dual use actually should be a very well thought through strategy, and not just, you know, are we doing both or like a bit. And on the other hand, just to pick on the resilience point, I think that's a really strong argument. It's also part of it. We talk about the 5% increase or the 5% GDP spend on defense, 1.5 should be on resilience. So the fund as well is investing in biotech, is investing in energy, new energy resources, but also energy storage and those kind of things. So it is much broader. So the whole issue that we're dealing with is, are our societies resilient against external shocks, and the awareness that our supply chains have become very fragile, and we have to kind of bring some of those capabilities back to Europe. So it's a much broader set of issues, and it's not just play of words, communication, ethics. It's actually a whole set of issues, and at the far end there is what we call the tip of the spear, which is pure offense. And we have to have that conversation about, we see the situation in Ukraine, but also the threat that we are facing. We cannot basically just keep our eyes closed for this. So also not as investors, also not as LPs, pension funds, etc. Is this something that we find important as societies? And we can't say we just hope it will happen and not actually have the conversation about how we're going to invest in those companies, how we're going to bring that technology to market, and what we apply it for. And I think every company, also to their own staff, will have to have a set of ethical rules that they comply with, where they will sell their products to, under which conditions they are building it, and all these, they will have to do that. Otherwise, they probably will find it very hard to hire anyone. And as an investor, you also want, of course, that team to grow, and you will demand ethics as well around that, especially if you are at the offensive end of the scale.
Yeah, one of the questions was related to hiring as well, like when, in terms of the ethics, like is there any trouble when it comes to like getting the right talent in that kind of conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. We've not seen it, and most of the companies in DefenceTech that I've talked with have not seen it. It's true that it's not for everyone, but I don't know of a company that is actively trying to make people's lives worse in DefenceTech. There really is a focus on how can we provide security, how can we prevent things like Ukraine from happening, with the realization that there are bad actors. Sometimes a tool will be developed and used for horrible purposes, and how can we minimize that likelihood?
I guess like acknowledging that would happen and then figuring out solutions to stop it from happening is kind of better than, as you say, just closing your eyes to the problem. Okay. How do you feel about the risk of Europe heavily relying on US tech companies and them owning and operating the infrastructure? Any takers?
It's an obvious issue. I mean, sovereignty in defense is becoming, a topic that everybody is trying to address. At the same time, and this comes back to what I said to begin with, if you look at Danish capabilities in defense, I mean, it's kind of obvious that we need to learn from somebody else, and who are the most prominent in this space, without any doubt, it's the Americans. So from our perspective, it's about trying to keep calm and carry on with our American relationships that we have built over the past 15, 20 years. And we certainly see that happening. It's still a close ally in NATO. So there are many reasons for this to continue, and potentially on the side applying a strategy where we learn to handle some of this ourselves, in the sense that we build in more innovation into our own structures and methodologies, so that our strategy, just to give you a specific example, we invested quite recently, earlier this year, in an American autonomous maritime drone company that is fairly mature on the US market side, but would like to further develop its market capabilities on the European side. So now they are setting up shop. Because of our investment, they are now setting up shop in Denmark and addressing the European market from there. And that's going to result in, from our perspective, for other Danish founders and the whole sort of market, hopefully maturing that part of the market and growing capability into the Danish market. basically sort of applying a top-down approach.
Great. Yeah, and Tim, your company's works between the US and Finland. Do you have any perspective on this from someone who's kind of in both buckets?
Yeah, no, I think that, what the approach we're taking is that, a system that's modular, that's open source, that is upgradable, is one that if a country buys, they're not locked into. This isn't the F-35. This isn't, a system where you've bought it, you're stuck with it for 30 years. And so in that sense, we're trying to make sure that countries can work with anyone alongside our tech, but also trying to take a stance of, hey, we're bicontinental. We want to work where our partners and customers are. And how can we do that? All of our research and development is done out of Finland. And we like it that way. We're looking, we know as we stand up manufacturing elsewhere around the world, obviously there will be some US manufacturing, but how can we service other markets in other places and grow that market, as you were saying, Eric?
Yeah. I think, of course, we now are suddenly confronted with a situation we didn't ever expect, right? We optimized on top of American defense tech, on top of American big tech, cloud services, all that, and now we suddenly have to reconsider how reliable that is, but you don't change overnight. So I think European startups have an advantage that now for the first time also defense procurement might actually look at domestic alternatives, even if they are not as good as the Americans. They might now have put in place teams, innovation teams at the MOD to upgrade those companies and to work with them, so to give them actually an opportunity to sell into European defense market. So that's new. So the situation is definitely more balanced now. But I mean, it's a given that many of the systems and all standards are set by our American allies, and we still also want to work with them and very dependent on them.
Yeah.
That's great. We have a lot of questions coming in. We're not going to get to all of them, so please vote for your favorites. And those will go to the top of the list. In the meantime, we spoke on our prep call about how there's a lot of complaining in the defense tech sector about how slow procurement is, and it's a bit of a slog, and it can be a bit of a killer for startups when things take too long. So I was wondering if any of you had any advice for people out in the audience who are working in defense tech or thinking about working in defense tech, of how you've kind of managed this kind of red tape issue, or if you've had any experiences overcoming these kind of obstacles that you could share.
Yeah, so don't worry, this is not going to be like a government procurement moan fest, which is normally what takes place, particularly at defense conferences. I think I would say that perhaps the most important thing is you need government or defense DNA on that core team within the company. Unfortunately, this is not a market where the best technology wins. You need to understand what is an incredibly labyrinthine bureaucratic system. You could be the best technologist, but you absolutely have to have people that understand defense acquisition, that understand routes to market, the colors of money, how to actually influence requirements. Because often when a tender comes through from government and you haven't heard of it, the chances are it's already been influenced and you're out of the races. So that's not all doom and gloom, but I would say that government DNA, a government savant on your team is really, really important.
Yes. And it used to be that government savant needed to be somebody with 30 or 40 years of government acquisition experience, at least on the US side. Large language models eliminate that. You don't necessarily need that person who has been in the defense system forever. And you can outsource some of that. Having someone who's familiar with the defense ecosystem, pairing them with a large language model to tailor responses to proposals goes a very long way. Because at the end of the day, the government reviewers are going down a checklist. Whatever they put out in their request for proposal is a checklist on the backside. And if you answer every single thing, you score better than if your tech is better. And so having that automated tool to say, all right, did we check everything, really helps.
This is not unique, right? We're seeing the same in medical devices, in health tech. So the health the health market is also particularly hard for procurement. So very good for doing tests and pilots and these things, but full-scale procurement is really hard. So there as well, same thing. You need to have people that know the inside, and you have to consider it as part of your business challenge. It's not you have a great product. No, one of your biggest innovations is probably how you design your go-to-market. That's what's going to be the differentiator between your success and somebody else's. Maybe not even the product. Of course, the product needs to be good, but that's something you really should hire for, and you should also design for.
And maybe challenging that a little bit. We do see that, in particular on the procurement side of defense, that there's certainly still some way to go, whereas that is more mature on for instance, the medtech area. So in addition to what you are trying to do on the company side, I think what we are trying to do on the procurement side is adding competence to really understand innovation. It's a little bit sad that I have to say it, but there are certainly parts of the military procurement part that still is slightly. It's early days for them to understand really what innovation is all about.
Yeah, but it's so we even have someone head of adoption. So we have someone on the fund that is talking to the military to get our companies basically give them a foot in the door at the military side, and it's a lot of education that needs to be done, but it can only be done by people that know how to talk the language, know where the barriers are, but it's our biggest challenge is to actually create that market. It's because the venture capital model is nice to basically supply the market with innovation, but to actually get that adopted is something that we as an investor feel a responsibility, and we're spending quite a lot of resources on that as well.
I do just want to pick, because it's interesting, I don't know what you think about this as well, but as soon as we start talking about startups or new market entrants in defense, it's always through this lens of innovation. And I think this is the other challenge for new market entrants, is that often you're immediately positioned to or asked to go for the innovation contracts, which are 6 months, 12 months, small amounts of money. But I think the other thing, and I guess coming back to your question about, advice for how you succeed, it's a complex go-to-market that's, ultimately you've got to be looking for multi-year, quite complex contracts, which is a very challenging go-to-market motion. And therefore you can't just rely on a sort of consistent cog turning of innovation contracts. It's just not sustainable. And so I'd like to see a bit of a change in the narrative around defense tech, which is new market entrants go for innovation, and then these other companies go for these long-term contracts, which helps them scale. I think the question should be, you've entered the market, now how do we actually provide you with the support, or how do you actually win these longer term contracts to build out and ultimately build a mid-market of competitors? I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Absolutely key advice. Yeah. Because you do, and this is also not very exceptional. This is even with big companies, if you enter on the innovation side, you end up there, and you don't actually move it selling to the
you end
business.
up sandboxing.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
And so the development now within the MODs is very much to build innovation capabilities. So they will have accelerators and innovation people, and those people are typically very enthusiastic about new stuff. But that doesn't mean that they are connected to the scale procurement on the other side. So you may run a very successful innovation. We have, for instance, a company, and they do underwater cable inspections, and they are the love child of NATO. Everybody talks about them, and it took them about 3 years to actually get a real contract with NATO. It's a really good point. Be aware that if you got your foot in the door and you're within the innovation departments, you have to start really working to get into the real procurement and not stay in the innovation part.
Yeah, I mean, there's a question that's kind of related to this too, is that there seems to be, Anonymous suggests, there's a trend of a war of cost. And do you think that defense innovations now have to be basically competing to be the cheapest possible option?
I think it depends. If you're going after something that you're developing a drone, for instance, it should probably be pretty inexpensive because our system's going to shoot it down a lot, and you want to make sure it's cheap. But I think more important is how reliable is this and how survivable is it? If it is something that can take care of itself, that can survive really well, if it's software, maybe it doesn't need to be the cheapest so long as it is the best. And so I think a lot of times competing on cost ends up being not as important in defense tech.
Yeah, what about on the investment side? Do you agree with that?
No, I mean, cost is obviously always an issue, and in comparable technologies, it certainly comes into play. But I would say I would rather look at it in the sense that we are seeing major shifts in difference in technology. So I witnessed a simulation a couple of weeks ago with an aircraft carrier set up against a swarm of drones. The aircraft carrier is what, the 10 billion or 20 billion, and the swarm of drones is 10 million all together. So obviously in that context, the cost is no longer really of any significance, but it is all about the shift in technology. Again, the old sort of technology way of looking at things compared to a more modern one, and cost is no more an issue, I believe, in this sector than it is in any sector that we're looking at.
No. Well, maybe in the past, everything defense related was super expensive, and because it was over-spec'd, and now we're seeing that a much cheaper product can do a better or a different job. So it has a very close link to defense strategy. And I think the challenge is much more that our MODs are considering what the new defense strategy should be. We see what's happening in the Ukraine, but we don't really know what's the next paradigm is. So it's much more about that, understanding how cost relates to effectiveness than a pure cost issue.
Yeah, and I guess the other aspect is like, well, how are we, not to get into anything too existential, but it depends how we're defining innovative. Like, it's actually very novel to build an equivalent system that's like 80% cheaper than what's currently being used. So that in itself can be viewed as actually very innovative. But yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, I think it's more reflective of a shift in war economics, a move away from very bespoke, exquisite systems towards more customizable, lower costs, and which is enabled by other, again, innovations in how we do manufacturing, automation. And so I think that's also reflected in, again, these new companies coming into the market who want to build faster and cheaper. But again, the challenge is that the incentive structures in defense procurement are not set up to actually drive those behaviors. If you have a procurement program that is cost plus, a supplier is not incentivized to build faster and cheaper. They're incentivized to get like lower cost, potentially like less specialist engineers, and to spend the amount of money that they've been offered. So again, like, I think the intent is there, but again, it needs to be met. And like, well, how are you actually incentivizing businesses to drive that innovation? Anyway, now I'm moaning about procurement again, sorry.
Yeah, we promised we weren't going to moan.
I know.
So someone here has claimed that they've spoken to the Danish chief of defense. This is completely I can't tell this, I don't know if this is true or not, but apparently he said he didn't want gadgets, he wanted tried and true tech. And this kind of, I guess, goes in opposition to the innovation point, like how with this kind of attitude, it probably makes quite hard for new companies to enter the space. Is that something that either of you have found with your stuff? Is this true, Eric?
It's certainly an exaggeration, and I would also say that no military, no MOD should be run on gadgets. I mean, we shouldn't deploy gadgets at all. But I would believe. I mean, it comes back to the definition of innovation, and that was essentially my point from before. That we still see this not only in the Danish military, but but also in other procurement facilities inside other militaries where that particular sort of way of looking at new technology is still predominant. So I understand sort of the underlying question. It might be pushing it a little bit.
I mean, this is what you hear a lot, and I think, and it's true. I mean, if you have a combat soldier who doesn't want stuff that doesn't work, and so you want tried technology, but it doesn't mean that if you still go for the air carrier of I don't know how many billion, and you know that there are swarms of drones that can take it out, you probably are not going to invest to your next air carrier, right? Or you have to have some really good defense systems. I think what is really the challenge now for defense is how to bring innovation cycles into operations that can actually match the innovation cycles and from your adversary, like we're seeing in Russia. You're launching new drones and there's new jamming technology, and then there's new technology coming on both sides, and that kind of rapid innovation just doesn't happen in an army like we know them, that are quite stagnant and that are built on tradition and on that kind of logic. So it's also changing the logic, and it's not about gadgets or not gadgets. It's about how rapidly can you employ new technologies or new solutions in the battlefield, and how can you reduce these innovation cycles? That's the real challenge. And how do you do that if there's not a clear adversary that you're fighting, and do that in peacetime? But that's a problem you see with large corporations in normal innovation, corporate innovation. How do you create a burning platform for the innovations to get enough priority? And whereas you know that you are a legacy company, you're slow, and so this is actually quite a traditional corporate innovation challenge, but now of course it's applied to defense.
Yeah, and I've heard similar sentiments on the U.S. side. The idea that traditional defense companies create these exquisite weapons where the country buys one or two of them. And that doesn't work when you need to fight at scale, as we see on the Ukrainian front. And so the sentiment that I've heard is we need something that can work at scale, and be delivered fast. And I don't think that's antithetical to new entrants. I think companies and innovators who have good ideas that can be scaled rapidly, that can be deployed at scale, are ones that are needed, and needed more right now, because the incumbent companies are still building those one-off gadgets that are very fancy and tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah, and I think, again, like that statement, it kind of reflects this view of like that 80% ready idea, which is like build something, it's not perfect, but you can build it quickly enough, again, for it to be tried and tested. I guess I would question that statement around, well, again, like how is that reflected in how you're actually setting up your programs? It's very important that there's like a bit of a paradigm shift. When we talk about an experimentation program that's funded, what do we mean by tried and tested? Is that connected to a funding line where we're going to pull some of that through and scale adoption? And I think the other big challenge is that, it's often that it's the TTPs, the tactics, techniques, and procedures, or the ConOps, that actually perhaps can't even keep up with some of those new technologies that are being developed. Hence why those programs for experimentation are very important, because you've probably got those TTPs are being developed on the fly as those technologies are being used. I think robotic dogs being a good example of an area where they've been doing a lot of experimentation in that space.
Okay, we've got a couple more minutes left, so going to end on a more quick, rapid-fire question. Someone's asked, for a newbie in defense tech, what are the best resources to dive into to kind of get started?
Follow John Ferry on LinkedIn. You might follow him as well. John Ferry. He's very, very good. US defense acquisition expert. Writes a lot about like business development playbooks in defense. He's good.
Tim, Eric, Constantijn, any suggestions of resources?
I would say the book Loon Shots, Loon like the bird, shots. Great book about taking big defense-related bets and how that was done successfully in the past. Also just a fun read.
So the question was about
resources. If they're a newbie to defense tech, what should they look at now to kind of get into it a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, I would always say talk to people that have been there. So get good advisors. So I once talked to the founder of Helsing, and he was basically said, forget about all the accelerators and forget about all that. If you don't want to build a really big company from the start, you don't even enter. So you have to have the connections with the majors. You have to have the connection with the defense sector, et cetera, from the start. And I thought, well, that message, all these companies that go into accelerators and should maybe hear that message, at least to have a good reference point. So really try to find people that have gone and traveled the hard way through all these systems, and get them quite early on as advisors on your board. Because you can read a lot of books, but nothing beats the real experience.
And those are all great points, and we should add that there's such momentum in this sector. So you can certainly find people who are passionate and knowledgeable on this topic.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's a good note to end on. Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks all of you.
Thank you.